Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to talk a little bit more about Battlefield 1. This is actually a discussion that was spurred on by some of the comments left by you guys in regards to the lack of a focus, I should say, on bolt-action iron sight rifles inside of the Battlefield 1 alpha, and inevitably, let's be honest, inside of the Battlefield 1 full release. Regardless of how many more bolt-action iron sight variants they add into the game, it doesn't pull away from the fact that automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons even are so readily abundant and that there is no restriction on them. This isn't an experience like we've seen in Verdun. Now, we've talked numerous times about the idea of gameplay over authenticity and accuracy. You have to make the game fun. And one of you, very accurately, I completely agree, pointed out that I may have came across as making it sound like bolt-action iron sight only had no opportunity to be fun inside of Battlefield 1. And that's not the way I feel at all. I wanted to set the record clear on that. I do think that that could be outstandingly fun inside of a game like Battlefield 1. And a small part of me, actually a large part of me, hopes very much so that DICE has been listening to the community and that they implement some sort of an authentic mode or something. Something that maybe takes a page from Verdun and has heavier restrictions on the use of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Things like the MP18 and the Lewis gun. And even some of the semi-automatic rifles that we saw for the medic class, and instead focuses on handing out iron sight bolt-action rifles to the players to provide that more authentic World War I experience. If they made a mode like that, they would appeal, I think, to a pretty nice chunk of the Battlefield audience. And again, it can be a separate mode, because this is what we're going to talk about next. As much as I want to see that happen, there's something that people easily forget and that they need to recognize, and that is the concept of accessibility. Battlefield for a very long time has been a very accessible franchise. Even going back, I know a lot of people like to look back at Battlefield 2 and the old games and be like, they were so much harder back then, they were so much more skill-based. Let me tell you something, they weren't. I think, skill level is always going to exist, and, for the fact that those games were PC games for the most part, yeah, you had the mouse and keyboard element, and you had no aim assist, so yes, that's inherently, to most people, more skill-based. But Battlefield's always been a pretty accessible franchise. Why do you think it grew so quickly? Why do you think it became one of the most successful first-person shooter franchises of all time? Because it did have a nice focus on accessibility. It stood apart from, Arma and Operation Flashpoint at the time, and provided people with this really grand and wonderful experience that held back from going too deep in certain areas in terms of mechanics in order to, again, make a more accessible experience. And that is very much the case we have here with Battlefield 1. I think the developers are more concerned with accessibility over everything else. A lot of people want to make it come across and be like, well, they just wanted automatic weapons in the game and, for the sake of fun. I think even before fun, accessibility is the key factor. And there is, without a doubt in my mind, the fact that if we had an authentic mode, or if Battlefield 1 was more focused on iron sight bolt-action rifles only, that the game would be more difficult. It would be far less accessible. There's no denying that. Why do you think Verdun is far less accessible than Battlefield 1 is going to be? That's a very hardcore, high skill ceiling type of gameplay. When you're forced to use that iron sight and, the bolt-action rifle, and you have no really aiming optic, or, very limited number of the people on the map have that, you end up with a much slower paced experience, one that is more methodical, and that one that definitely requires a higher level of twitch precision and accuracy, because you have that one shot and you've got a very slow reload. So that mode would be far more inaccessible than the core modes that we're going to see released inside of Battlefield 1 that will include the abundance of automatic and semi-automatic weapons for the different classes. This is why Battlefield is Battlefield. DICE needs to push for that accessibility. Would it be cool to see them, throw a monkey in the wrench and take a big risk and, dive for the more hardcore experience? A lot of people would say yes, but they'd be alienating a huge portion of their audience. Some of those people, well past their 30s and 40s, who have been playing Battlefield since the dawn of its existence. We get really caught up, right, in, as an individual, maybe wanting something a little bit more hardcore because our skill ceiling, our personal skill level is there. We can play games like Verdun, we can play games like Counter-Strike, and it's easy to lose focus on the people who don't have that same speed and skill. Why should they be excluded from a game like Battlefield? Battlefield has never set out to make itself the hardcore, FPS experience that something like Counter-Strike is. or something like Arma is. You know, it's always been built around, hey, everyone can have Battlefield moments, everybody can get in here. Even if they've never marketed it directly, that's the audience that Battlefield has been able to bring into the mix, you know, specifically since the launch of Bad Company. So just think about that. You know, the next time you post a comment or you consider something and you say that, you know, DICE and EA they're catering to the Call of Duty kids, to the younger generation, that's not actually true. In reality, and I know this from personal experience, those young kids, they're the one with the Twitch skills. They're you and me 10 years ago. They've got the great eyesight. They've got the amazing reflexes, the amazing reaction times. Those are the kids trashing people on CSGO. Those are the kids trashing people, you know, in some pretty competitive experiences. You know, don't try and play it off like, oh, they're appealing to the 12 and 13-year-olds, because the 12 and 13-year-olds, once they get their chance and they get their practice in, they're the ones that are going to be kicking all of our asses. In fact, most of them already are. You know, they're not the ones who need the accessibility. It's the older folks, and I respect when a developer builds a game for that. Whether it's to reach a larger audience, to make more money, or because they actually realize that they have an older audience that wants to play their game that doesn't have that same level of reaction time anymore. I don't care what the reason is. Accessibility, everybody wins at the end of the day. And as long as it's not overdone, you can still get a great experience that still has a wide enough skill gap where the people who are really good can be really good, and the people who are down there who struggle a little bit in one area can do something else to help their team. I've talked about this in the past so many times with the Battlefield franchise. This is why it's great. You don't have to be that Twitch guy. You don't have to be the guy with the great reaction time who's on the front line, who's dropping all the kills. You can be the tank driver. You can be the helicopter pilot. Maybe that's more your speed. You know, you can be the medic. You can be the support gunner that just lays down that fire. These are the things that make Battlefield great, and it's so easy to forget that. It's so easy to get caught up in the mess of, like, this is what I want Battlefield to do because this is the experience that I personally want. I've been there too, you know. I have plenty of areas where I'd love to criticize Battlefield. You know, ways in which I wish the game would take a hint from things like Squad and Project Reality, even going back to Battlefield 2, and push for a little bit more hardcoreness, you know, in some of their mechanics. And I think there's still room to do that without knocking out that accessibility wall. But at the end of the day, I think that DICE and EA have always managed to find a very nice sweet spot for the franchise. I fully understand the implementation of automatics, again, not because it's a tool for increasing fun, let's get that straight, but because of that level of accessibility that they want to push for Battlefield 1. So there you have it, guys. Really take that into consideration the next time you go to downplay DICE or, you know, try and act like they're developing a game for 12-year-olds. It's simply not the fact, man. You know, look at the people who are in the competitive scene right now for a lot of those games, the up-and-comers. They're younger than you and me. They're 18, 17, 16. You know, they are young dudes with great reaction times. That accessibility isn't always just for the younger generation. And like I said, I appreciate that accessibility. You know, outside of games like Battlefield, I think Forza has done an amazing job at being an extremely accessible and tunable experience. You can play it hardcore, you can play it laid back. It's allowed someone like my dad, who didn't really grow up playing anything other than, you know, occasional games on the NES, who has severe carpal tunnel and nerve damage. He can't play with a controller for hours on end, especially if he has to manipulate the joysticks every 10 seconds. He can play a game like Forza. He can experience the cars he had when he was a kid. He can get that driving experience. And there's a whole group of people who play Battlefield who are able to have fun, to enjoy the game, to fly the helicopters, to fly the tanks, to support their team in one way or another, outside of that Twitch shooter experience, you know, that reaction-based shooter experience. That's pretty special. Let's not forget about that. We can still criticize Battlefield 1, and I'll be there day one when the game releases to tell you, you know, everything I love and hate about it. But let's not knock how valuable accessibility is to a huge portion of the audience that exists inside of the world of video games. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.